Joining us now is Alexis McGill-Johnson, president of Planned Parenthood. So you were in the courtroom. From all reports, those of our correspondents and legal experts in the courtroom as well, the majority, a clear majority, and perhaps a super majority of the court, of the justices, were skeptical of the argument that these doctors who have principal concerns about prescribing this don't have other options to opt out.
Yeah. Hello, Andrea. I think that's absolutely the same assessment I walked away with. I saw a super majority of justices, including the liberal justices and conservative justices, really struggling to find standing in this question, to really understand how the case had gotten before them. And I think that really speaks to the fact that, this is the second time within 2 years that we are now facing a question as to whether or not reproductive freedom should be available to people needing access to basic health care. And to come up with hypothetical situations, I think at one point Justice Kagan said, it's like we're trying to find the most random probability that all of the intersections of these things would happen so that a doctor would have to prescribe a prescription or be a part of an elective abortion procedure in a way that, violated their conscientious objection, when in fact there were protections already from the government that the prelogar, the SG made very clear. So I think it was really an interesting opportunity to sit and listen to them grapple with the fact that there really was no standing in this case, that mifepristone is safe and effective. I think the government made very clear that the role of the FDA to ensure the safety and the effectiveness of the medication had been done over the last 20 years in multiple studies, 5 million patients. And I think that the opposition to mifepristone from the HM really did not hold. And so it was very interesting to be in a courtroom with that level of skepticism, given that this is the court that also gave us Roe overturning.
And do you have concerns? Andrew Weissman, from a legal standpoint, you may not have heard him as you were getting ready to go on the air, was saying that his concern is that they would clearly rule on standing and say that this group of doctors did not have standing to bring this case, but could revisit this on medical grounds or FDA regulatory grounds down the road, waiting till after the election cycle in the next term, if another group of people who did have standing brought a case in one of those, shall we call it a red district.
Yes. Well, I mean, look, of course, we know anything is possible. And, I certainly won't read the tea leaves of what the actual opinion could be, however narrow. I do think that the government made clear that it would still be a very highly hypothetical, probabilistic kind of moment for them to actually find standing, to find a doctor who was not allowed to object from a conscience standpoint when those protections are clear and exist, and that there are many mechanisms in place that do so. I found it particularly interesting that, the questions that kept coming back to the plaintiff's attorney really around the, whether or not the court should also be the one being the arbiter of what is safe and effective, arbiter of whether or not these studies were effective, when in fact that is the role and the charge of the FDA to determine whether or not a medication is safe and effective, and taking away that regulatory ability to understand the impact would also include a significant disruption within the pharmaceutical industry. So I think standing was one piece of that, but also really understanding the fact that the impact to the industry as well as the impact to patients seeking access, I think were very clearly argued today by the government.
Alexis McGill-Johnson, thank you so much from Planned Parenthood.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.